Soumya Surthi to the virtual lectern. Soumya Surthi, nostalgia. Soumya Surthi.
Fellow Toastmasters, I want all of you to close your eyes with me. Everyone closed? No peeking? Okay. Now imagine yourself back in your childhood home with your parents. Okay? It's summertime. Exams are finished. You're off of school, and you've just had an amazing day biking around with your friends, or just hanging out at the park, or loitering in the mall. Now imagine yourself coming home for dinner time. You take a deep breath and you smell your favorite home cooked meal before you even enter the front door. So you wash up, you sit down on the table, and you take that oh so scrumptious first bite. You feel the textures, the aroma, and the wonderful flavor of your favorite childhood meal. Now let's open our eyes. By this point, you should be feeling two things. The first is some semblance of happiness, thinking about how delicious your favorite home-cooked meal is. And the second feeling is actually the feeling I'm more interested in today, which is your nostalgia. You see, the sight of the landscape of the environment you grew up in, the emotion of an old song you listened to on repeat for just a month straight, or even the taste of a home-cooked meal. All of these things elicit a feeling that is so unique and powerful that it just appears to transcend time and space. It brings us back into a state of being that cannot be described with anything other than just that one word, nostalgia. Now, nostalgia is one of the most unique and valuable capacities of the human mind. It is the closest thing that all of us have to time travel because it gives us an opportunity to experience moments of our life while being completely free of the normal anxieties and uncertainties that can come with it. Now, the triggers for this unique way to travel through time, which you'll never see in a sci-fi film, can actually happen at any time, to anyone, and any place. That is why I want to dedicate today's speech to discussing our wonderful shared time machine of nostalgia. Now, I will begin this whole presentation with an exploration of the history of nostalgia, followed by the science behind it. And after this, we're going to put all our heads together to discuss more abstractly about the concept of nostalgia and how it affects your livelihood every single day. Now let's go back to the 80s. No, not the 80s with Guns N' Roses, not that one. I mean the 1680s. Now in the late 17th century, a medical student named Johannes Hofer from Switzerland noticed a strange illness affecting Swiss mercenaries who had served abroad and then had come home. Now, the symptoms of this strange disease include fatigue, insomnia, irregular heartbeat, indigestion, and fever, which were so strong that soldiers often had to be discharged. They had no idea what to do. Now, as Johannes discovered, the cause was not some physical disturbance, some sort of injury or ailment, but instead it was an intense yearning for their mountain homeland back in the Swiss Alps. Now, he dubbed this condition nostalgia, combining the Greek words nostos for homecoming and algos for pain and longing to create nostalgia. Now, at first, nostalgia was considered exclusive to Swiss citizens, and some doctors proposed that the constant sound of cowbells on farms in the Swiss Alps actually caused trauma to the eardrums and the brain. And so commanders even forbade their soldiers from singing traditional Swiss songs for the fear that they'd lead to desertion or even suicide. But that was back then. And as time went on past the 17th century and people began to globalize and migrate worldwide, nostalgia was observed in various groups, not just in the Swiss. It turned out that anyone separated from their native place for a long time was vulnerable to this dangerous neurological disease. But by the early 20th century, professionals no longer viewed it as a neurological disease. Now, part of this shift in the way they viewed nostalgia was the field of psychology's shift, more specifically, away from pure theory and more towards careful, systematic, and empirical observation. So really, it boils down to a historic example of correlation versus causation, where professionals realize that many of the negative symptoms that may have been simply correlated with nostalgia were not caused by it. Now, nostalgia is a quite complex emotional state when you think about it, because it can include feelings of loss and sadness. But generally, it doesn't put people in a negative mood. You kind of look back at things wistfully with a sort of solemn happiness, which is a sort of oxymoron. But those are the feelings that nostalgia gives to us, and it's why it has remained such a mystery for so long. Now, rather than being a cause of mental distress, because it's such a complex emotion, nostalgia can be a restorative way of coping with this longing for the past. For instance, if you begin to experience a negative emotional state in the present day about a very troubling challenge that you're going through, you are likely to naturally use nostalgia to reduce this distress and restore well-being, because you're going to start thinking about how good things used to be back in the day. Now, that is what happens in our brains. Those are the sort of ways that we intellectualize and sort of describe to ourselves what we're feeling. But in terms of neuroscience, what about the sensory experience of nostalgia? What's happening in this big old noggin of ours when we smell our favorite dessert or even hear a song from a decade ago? Now, Sigmund Freud realized in 1908 that there was a strong link between odor and emotions. Now, this is because our nose is connected directly to the limbic system of our brain, where our emotions are housed and controlled. Now, the average person, you or I, can detect over 10,000, that's right, 10,000 different odors. And each one of these 10,000 odors will cause people to react differently because they associate these smells with completely different experiences. Now, your olfactory system has a very strong input into the amygdala, which is a portion of the limbic system that causes intense emotions and motivation. But the amygdala links with the hippocampus, the memory stores of your brain. So you're more likely to evoke powerful, positive, and enjoyable memories from smell. Now, this could explain why nostalgia often results in positive emotions, since the nose is connected to the two portions of the brain, the amygdala and hippocampus, that are so important for feelings and memories. Now, when researchers studied this, they found that the smell of baked goods was found to be the greatest olfactory stimulant of nostalgia, as well as other scents, such as pasta, bacon, and meatballs. So if you want someone to remember the past, make sure you serve them dinner rolls, spaghetti and meatballs topped off with a sprinkle of bacon. Strange meal, but neuroscientists would agree with you. But before we move on from the sensory aspect of nostalgia, let's not forget about our other powerful nostalgia stimulant. Yes, I'm talking about sound. Playing a song from your youth can get a crowd of people excited. But in my experience, it doesn't have to be as complex as a long song. Even a simple sound can get me nostalgic. And I'll give you an example. So I got this Game Boy back in 2005. This is my Game Boy Advanced SP. And hearing this starting noise might bring back a lot of my childhood memories. If you had a Game Boy or any sort of similar device, you might know what I'm talking about. Everyone hear that? Now, that starting noise is bringing me back right now while I'm giving this speech. I remember all those long road trips, waiting at the doctor's office, bored out of my mind, or even on the school bus when none of my friends wanted to talk to me. Even at nighttime, when I pretended to be sleeping, when my parents would open the door and check, I was instead under the covers leveling up my Pokemon so I can face off against the final gym and finally beat the game. But going back to music, it has been found that songs that were on the radio during your childhood will make you feel more attached to them. They will be more recognized and help trigger memories of that past time. But here's something else I learned, which I found quite fascinating. These musical preferences you have for a certain song can be inherited. That's strange. So in 2012, Cornell University and UC Santa Cruz discovered that college-age students that were around 20 years old felt nostalgia for not only music playing during their own childhood, but also for songs played from the 1960s and 1980s. Yeah, I'm talking about Guns N' Roses, which were popular way before their birth and before my own birth. Music that was popular long before they were born created just as much nostalgia as songs that were constantly on the radio during their teen years. So they theorized that parents passed down their musical taste to their kids by playing the tunes frequently in their developmental years and passed down the musical preferences inherited from their own parents. And when I read this, I thought about my dad playing Bryan Adams, Cyndi Lauper, the Backstreet Boys. But my favorite is definitely that George Michael song. It's called Careless Whisper. I'm sure this will sound familiar to some of you folks. That's right, it's the I'm never gonna dance again, guilty feet have got no rhythm. But I think based on this finding, I will be more wise, and you may be wise as well, to avoid playing too much Despacito or Old Town Road around your kids, so they don't get touchy and sentimental and get all wistful with all their feelings when they hear that, yeah, I'm gonna take my horse to the Old Town Road. All right, enough singing. Back to the speech. So on a more serious note, appealing to collective nostalgia can happen through music, but more in terms of grounded reality. It's a very effective political strategy. Many people can long for how a country was in the past and wish that those times would come back to the present. So politicians make use of this, and people, voters, can fall for the promises of politicians to revive those old times. However, the only thing we can do is recreate similar circumstances, but in no way can we bring back the past. Remind you of anything? Say a red hat that has a very popular slogan on it, something about making a country great again? Now, on this note of how serious nostalgia is in our daily lives, at this point, I want to try to pivot our discussion from the explanation of nostalgia with science and shift into thinking more abstractly about nostalgia and what its purpose might be in the grand scheme of things. Now, if you're feeling down, nostalgia might cheer you up, helping you feel closer to people and focus on the things that are important to you. But at the same time, there are some less helpful side effects, and you may have realized this from your end. For one thing, nostalgia can kind of screw with your memory a little bit. When people are asked to rate their TV shows from different decades that they experienced, they generally say that shows from the past are better than the ones from today, even when they're reminded of current TV shows that they like just as much or even more. I watch a lot of SNL videos on YouTube, and most of the ones that appeal to me came out during my teenage years, from the 2006 to high school years. And oftentimes in the comments, you'll see a bunch of people saying, oh man, SNL hasn't been funny since insert 1900s decade here. And the list goes on and on about hyperbolic statements based on how things used to be better back in the day. But really, if people were to go back and watch every single season of SNL, and take a closer look, they'll find that not only were each decade full of funny, marvelous skits from wonderful actors, but they also had really bad ones, which no one really liked to watch. And every single decade has those skits. But with our nostalgia, we remember the good things, the good old days, back when Will Ferrell was hosting Jeopardy, or back when George Carlin has his own stand-up routine, and we compare it to the crappy skits we see now, where it's the same character doing the same catchphrase in every single skit. Now, part of this is because when human beings enter a new phase in our lives, our brains tend to romanticize the phases that happened before. It's like leaving a job that didn't sit well with you. When you leave the job that you absolutely hated, you're full of joy. After a year or so, you begin to long for that pointless conversation at the coffee machine, or even the stupid jokes from certain coworkers. Our time working there has become nostalgic, and we tend to think, oh, now I realize how great that job was. I really wouldn't mind working there again. But do we base this statement on facts, or do we base it on emotions evoked by mere memories? So clearly, nostalgia is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for a period in the past based on your memories. But remember, the problem with your memories is that they aren't the same as reality. Your brain and your memories are probably the biggest trickster that you know, because they are just creating these subjective reconstructions of events that are behind us, sort of fantasies about a realm outside of the present moment that are just so beautifully engraved in our minds. You see, one benefit of the past is that it is a dramatically foreshortened, edited version of the present. Even the best days of our lives contain a range of dull and uncomfortable moments, like preparing your breakfast, showering, or even cleaning up your room after you come home. But with memory, like skilled editors with hours of raw and often uninspired footage, the editors of your brain will lock on to the most consequential moments and therefore use them to construct sequences that feel a great deal more meaningful and interesting and so wonderful than the raw, uninspired footage that generated them. You see, with our nostalgic brains, hours and hours of mediocrity can be reduced to 5 or 6 picture-perfect images. So really, nostalgia is the present day enhanced and improved upon by an editing machine that is constantly working as you continue to age and move through time, looking back and seeing this wonderful afterthought of this edited memory. But before we talk about the future, let's think more about the present, just for a quick second. When you think about the present, there are so many decisions and choices that you are making every single minute. And much of what ruins the present is sheer anxiety. Now, hold your horses. I don't mean anxiety to a debilitating or even medically relevant level, but it's more of a subtle, ongoing anxiety that is just a natural part of our daily lives. And this isn't an anxiety that comes with negative connotations, but more so a result of the enormous number of possibilities, some of them hugely gruesome, which we are constantly aware of in the background. You see, anything could theoretically happen. An earthquake, a brain aneurysm, or your computer just shutting down, which gives rise to this non-specific, subtle anxiety that trails most of us all the time. The simple dread at the unknown of what is to come next. But then, of course, moving into the future, only a very limited range of awful things do ever come to pass. And as we think about the past, we forget about this subtle, non-specific anxiety that was happening, and we shift to our new present, moving away from our old present, which is now the past. So now, let's say that we are feeling nostalgic and remembering an event. What we leave out of it is how much of that event we actually spent anticipating an appalling future that never came. The nature of our memories makes this past unreliable because simply it's a recreation of the mind and therefore not the real thing. But nostalgia doesn't care about that because romanticizing our past in the good old days in our memory leaves us wishful for getting those good times back. We know this, but we keep doing it because it's comfortable and it's reassuring. I think that relationships are the best example of this because why do so many people crave back their exes even though the relationship or marriage was highly dysfunctional? It's looking at the past with rose-colored glasses on, where all the red flags just look like regular flags. Now, we have lived through the times that have filled us with anxiety and fears and so much hesitance. We used to be worried about it, but here we are, doing just fine. Ironically, letting this state of nostalgia carry us into the past can remind us of the importance of appreciating the present. It shows us that our desire to perfect all the moments of life is just foolish and unnecessary. Nostalgia is our collective reminder that existence is merely temporary. We are just a small, minuscule blip in the vast tale of the universe. And I think that nostalgia serves an even greater function. The ship of Theseus is a thought experiment. The famous ship sailed by the hero Theseus was kept in a harbor as a museum piece. And as the years went by, some of the wooden parts began to rot and were replaced by new ones. So eventually, every part had been replaced. The question then is whether the restored ship is still the same object as the original. Every single day, you are losing atoms and gaining new ones from what you eat and drink. It takes about 7 to 10 years to replace every atom in your body, which means that the matter that you call you today was not a part of you a decade ago. Your physical body, really all of us, every human on Earth is just a temporary group of atoms and molecules, a bunch of incoming atoms making your shape and then leaving. So what's consistent here? What are you? Nostalgia, fondly remembering the past, what you used to do and who you used to be is simply a way for your brain to answer that question. Your memories, your past, who you used to be, and consequently who you are now makes nostalgia a healthy way to answer the question of, who am I? I want to end off this speech with this. Yes, nostalgia is our personal time machine, our hard-working memory editor going through all the uninspired raw footage. But most of all, it is a perfect representation of the human spirit. Deep down, we all know our time on this big blue ball in space is limited to less than 100 years. We are all just commas and minuscule blips, a slight pause in the grand scheme of things. Nostalgia, to me, represents a sort of rebellion against this impermanence, a call to arms against the temporary nature of our world. To me, nostalgia is our perfectly crafted weapon to lock in our good old days and give us a sense of permanence in the world of the temporary. Madam Toastmaster.